Fate Zero is a work of art. The best way for me to describe my feelings towards Fate Zero is that it feels like the show was made just for me. If I somehow had a way to get a studio to make my ideal anime, something almost exactly like Fate Zero would be the result. However, not only is this show fantastic for me subjectively, but I'm convinced that the show is great objectively as well. It's a character-driven story that's both personal and epic. This video will attempt an unbiased analysis of the show's qualities, and hopefully I'll be able to do it justice. Just a quick disclaimer before we get started. This video is going to be less of a traditional review, and more of a closer look at what are in my opinion the greatest strengths of Fate Zero, along with a few of its weaknesses. I also won't be talking much about the animation and art of the show because there's not much I can say about it, other than the fact that it's amazing. Instead, I'll dive deeper into some of the tools Fate Zero uses to make its story so memorable. This video is definitely best for those who have already seen the show, because we're going to go really deep into spoiler territory here. However, in case of any new viewers, I'll do a quick rundown of the premise and some background information. Fate Zero is a Ufotable production based off of the light novel of the same name written by famed nihilist Gen Urobuchi, who is also the writer for popular anime of a similar style such as Madoka Magica and Psycho Pass. Fate Zero is a prequel to Kineko Nasu's insanely popular Fate Stay Night visual novel series, Studio Dean's Fate Stay Night anime, and Ufotable's Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works anime. If you're curious about the order in which you should experience this series, then you're asking the wrong guy because I have no idea. This is a hotly debated topic, and I'm no expert as I haven't read any of the visual novels, and I've only watched both Ufotable shows along with the light novel for Fate Zero. Just comb through some message boards to find the best order because I'm no help. Anyways, this show was set in the fictional Japanese city of Fuyuki, in a world where mages and magic exist as an ingrained part of society, and are divided into subsets of beliefs or doctrines. This story follows the Fourth Holy Grail War, in which 7 mages are chosen to summon 7 magical servants to fight for them. These servants are heroic spirits, legendary heroes from virtually any time period in history. The servants engage in a tactical fight to the death, in which the winning master-servant duo is presented with the Holy Grail, a magical device said to be able to grant any sort of wish. In short, Fate Zero is a very dark, grim, action-packed, and intellectual battle royale. Is it good? Absolutely yes. Do I recommend it? Yes. From here on, however, I'll be discussing just what makes the show so good, so spoilers are fair game. One of the most unique things about Fate Zero is its narrative structure and the way screen time is divided. There is no single main character, but instead a cast of several important characters. This method of switching the narrative between multiple characters is used in a somewhat similar vein in HBO's Game of Thrones series, Madhouse's Monster, and some of the darker arcs in Hunter x Hunter. When it comes to narrative style, the show is not a linear progression following the exploits of our hero. Instead, Fate Zero is more of a story following many characters, using multi-layered, sometimes intertwining plot threads, each of which progresses at a contextually effective pace. This gives off the impression that this story is bigger than any one character. Everyone has their own ideals, and no one ideal is treated as better or worse by the narrative, which leads to some very thought-provoking scenes. Not only is this scattered perspective effective in displaying the clash of many different philosophies and ideologies on subjects like kingship, purpose, and aristocracy, but it allows for a very balanced viewing experience, which is something that I thought Unlimited Blade Works struggled with. An entire show could be ruined if the viewer hates the protagonist, or doesn't buy their morals or motivations. In Fate Zero, it could be argued that there are 6 or 7 main characters, with another 6 or 7 additional ones having a huge influence on the story as well. Not every character is as complex as someone like Griffith from Berserk or Johann Liebert from Monster, but each has their own beliefs, ideals, and motivations for wanting the Grail. Every character is deep and well characterized while bringing something unique to the table. Because of this is a show that I can recommend to the vast majority of anime viewers, as it's got a bit of something for everyone with regards to characters. Dark characters, fun characters, tragic characters, noble characters, endearing characters, it's all here. This narrative structure also allows the story itself to be very diverse. Fate Zero has smart dialogue, action, corrupt ideologies, internal struggles, and more. Without feeling rushed or bloated, this show tackles so much, mainly because the narrative structure gives it license to do so. Appealing to the masses can actually hurt a show by making it good across a number of fronts, without actually being great at anything. Luckily, Fate Zero tackles all of these aspects with sophistication and quality. It's filled to the brim with brilliant character exploration, grand and epic battles, some heart-stopping, shocking moments, and tragedy. Lots and lots of tragedy. In addition to the scattered perspective, the show has a distinct shift in style between seasons 1 and 2. Season 1 essentially lays the groundwork, introducing all the characters and establishing the dynamics of several character relationships, building the setting and setting a tone. This is all very important for Season 2, where all the methodical building up has a huge payoff and essentially all hell breaks loose. I've seen some criticism about the fights in the first season, saying that they all occur for no reason since none of the servants or masters are killed. To this I have two rebuttals. Firstly, a servant is killed. It's just assassin. Secondly, these fights do have a purpose. In the first real battle of the series, spanning episodes 4 and 5, it may seem on the surface that it was pointless filler since nothing comes of the fight. However, this fight establishes many things. Iris feels growing bond with Saber, the budding knight's respect between Saber and Lancer, the contrast in ideals between Lancer and Kenneth, how much of a badass Ryder is and how he actually does respect Waver, Karya's kamikaze attitude towards the war, Berserker's fixation with Saber, Kiritsugu's tactics, just how much of a glorious, arrogant bastard Gilgamesh is, and more. Each of these aspects are important to the story later on, and are introduced in this fight in an organic way. This fight alone characterizes 5 of the 7 servants, and shows the viewer exactly just how each of them thinks and fights. Not to mention, 3 noble phantasms are revealed. I guess you could say this battle is the appetizer for Fate Zero. It shows you just what you're going to get out of these characters, and leaves you hungry for more. With that said, how lame would it be if one of the servants had actually died in this battle? And it wasn't just this fight either. Every fight has a purpose and progresses either the characters or the plot in some way, even if there is no death at the end of it. Not only does the lack of death in the earlier parts of the show make sense from a storytelling standpoint, but it totally makes sense for the characters within the context of the story. Let me explain. One valid argument could be, this is an all-out war, why isn't there more ruthlessness? Why isn't every servant doing their absolute utmost to kill all their enemies? My answer would be this. How many servants within Fate Zero actually want to win the Holy Grail above everything else? Seriously, think about it. Castor and Ryunosuke care far more about murdering kids than winning the Grail. Kira and Assassin's job isn't to win, it's to scout the opponents and feed information to Tokiomi for him to win. Tokiomi is constantly walking on eggshells with Gilgamesh, who isn't really bothered with the Holy Grail in the beginning and knows that he could wipe out any of the servants except Berserker without a second thought if it really came to it. And let's face it, he's right. The only exception is his all-out fights with Berserker, who was clearly trying to kill everyone and everything, spurred on by Karya, who was trying his hardest to win. So no one can really complain about those two. While Kenneth wants to win the Grail above all else, his servant's ideals clash with his own, and Lancer is clearly mainly in this war to fight a knight's noble fight. He does want to carry out his master's wishes, though not if it compromises his knightly honor. Lancer would rather lose fairly than win dirty, though we'll explore that part a bit later. Waver wants to win, but slowly realizes that winning is not nearly as important as he initially thought, while Ryder values the thrill of battle far more than being pragmatic with his killings. Saber definitely wanted the Grail, but her arm was injured early on, and she was preoccupied with stopping Castor, so there wasn't too much that she could do. As for Kiritsugu, well, the guy is just a ruthless savage. So as you can see, most of the servants didn't care about being as efficient as possible with their killings as much as they did about their ulterior motives. And it's also important to note that this war is very tactical and strategic. Servants must be very careful if they unleash all their power at once, as enemy familiars could be nearby scouting. Additionally, for most of Season 1, it's important to remember that the Grail War was stopped in order for everyone to deal with Castor. Many of the masters and servants were preoccupied with killing Castor in order to get an extra command seal. Also, it should be noted that mana is limited and servants need to replenish their energy once in a while, so fights can't be constant. While the most efficient Holy Grail War would have 7 Kiritsugus and 7 Berserkers running around Fuyuki, that wouldn't make for a very interesting show, would it? The slow build-up, world building, and character development in Season 1 makes sense from both a storytelling and character-focused standpoint. The steady build-up of Season 1 is so important to the show because it makes Season 2 all the more devastating when the killing finally starts. One of the brilliant strengths of Fate Zero is its ability to set and convey a mood or atmosphere through the use of visual imagery, dialogue, and music. It uses subtexts and little tricks to subconsciously draw the viewer into the heavy tone of the story and foreshadow later events. For me personally, and many people I've talked to, it was obvious from pretty much the first scene that Fate Zero was going to be a tragedy because the tone conveyed this so strongly. Let's analyze the first scene of the series. We open to a desolate castle in the middle of a snowstorm. We see a man staring through a window at the tempest outside. Yuki Kajiura's sad and melancholy score plays forebodingly over the wind and snow. The man then goes to meet his new baby daughter. The color scheme of this scene almost has an ominous and joyless feel. Lots of whites, blacks, and grays, in contrast to Irisfield's red eyes, which also convey a little bit about her to the viewer as well. She clearly has a different emotional energy to this man. Right away, we can see that Kiritsugu is carrying a heavy burden, just by his body language and behavior, and this is all before he utters his first words of the series.
Airi, 僕は君を死なせる羽目になる。
The moment these words are uttered, Fate Zero establishes itself as a dark, ominous anime where the stakes are higher than we might have initially expected. The stark difference between Irisfield's optimistic, hopeful dialogue and Kiritsugu's unrelenting dreariness tells you all you need to know about his emotional state. Eventually, he reluctantly gives in and moves in to hold his child, despite his unwillingness. The camera then pans out from this scene, and we see the desolate Ainsburn castle in the blizzard, just driving home feelings of isolation and illustrating that this man is truly alone. This small scene just says so much. The sad and joyless music sets an appropriate mood. The imagery of a desolate castle in a snowstorm, along with Kiritsugu sadly looking out the window, the high ceilings and wide rooms of the Ainsburn castle, it all illustrates a subtle but firm feeling of pure isolation and loneliness. It's clear that this man is suffering. The dialogue just drives this atmosphere home. This scene's ability to convey a tragic atmosphere and set the tone of the series through these elements adds just a little bit of extra emotional impact and gravitas to each sword swing in the later fights, because the earlier parts of the show brilliantly established that so much is at stake in this battle. It's not just the first scene too. Tone setting is present in many little scenes throughout the first season. One of my favorite lines of dialogue in the entire series is at the end of episode 3, when Irisfield and Saber are discussing Kiritsugu in a great little scene.
Does Kiritsugu not enjoy the time he spends with you?
When he's happy, for some reason, it seems to cause him pain.
It's a subtle little line that says so much. It's got such a tragic subtext to it that it had me both feeling a foreboding atmosphere, blanketing every scene, and paying close attention to Kiritsugu from that point on. It's not overly obvious, but there is a tense and heavy atmosphere and tone that is present throughout the whole series. This tone is so important because it draws in the viewer and essentially displays that as long as the mood of the anime is kept consistent, this show will not have a happy ending. Fate Zero is not a show about glory, victory, and an almighty triumph resulting in the granting of a selfless wish, and it should not be viewed as such. It's a grim, gritty, tragic tale about the pointlessness of war, and this is conveyed brilliantly through tone and atmosphere.